And I will now hand over to Lucy.
Thank you very much, and it's really lovely to meet you all. I'm just going to share my screen and show you. My name is Lucy Isaacson, and I sit with Cornwall Community Flood Forum, Cornwall Council's Strategic Resilience Board, the South West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, and Cornwall Catchment Partnership. I have a bachelor's in Earth System Science and a master's degree in Climate Change and Risk Management, both with a focus on behavioural change. So hopefully you'll feel like you're in good hands. First of all, thank you for being here, for being keen and proactive, and for doing what you do, spending this time. And sometimes it's really difficult to take in the enormity of climate change and the problems ahead. But we do know if we radically change things, we're in for a better chance. So how do we engage with everyone to alter our course? And I hope today to help you with that. The government is legislating a path to mitigate emissions by 78% over the next 15 years. And we need to jump quite a few big hurdles for that. And we need to engage everyone to make it happen. And this is part of the pathway to net zero. And that's a target of removing greenhouse gases produced by us, by reducing emissions and also absorbing carbon atmosphere from the atmosphere. So by illustrating climate change through past stories, current advice and projections, there will be something for everyone. There needs to be different things. But for this all to sink in, without fear freezing people, we need to share the opportunities we have. And there's quite a few of them. Welcome to the dawn of the Green Industrial Revolution. Now, who knows St Michael's Mount in Cornwall? Let's put things in perspective, turn back the clock 264 years. In the 18th century, Cornish antiquarian Reverend William Borlase, he wrote, in short, the atmosphere is such a various, irritable mixture, the action of the heavenly bodies so perpetually shifting, nothing permanent and sure is expected. Well, nothing's really changed, actually. Borlase discovered the submerged forest that surrounds St Michael's Mount in Cornwall, and archives from the last 2 centuries suggest several causes for why it's disappeared, in the form of sea surges, sea level rise, and geological activity. Borlase wrote to the Dean of Exeter, Dr. Charles Littleton, and his letter describes 3-foot wide oaks lying found horizontally, with roots buried deeper than they could dig, with hazel and willow from 300 yards below the watermark. Borlase resolved that the slow advances had sunk the land or raised the sea level by 16 feet. He confirmed the subsidence must have been followed by a sudden inundation where formerly existed a large country between Land's End and Scilly. Now, some of my research pursued the history of this idea to find a different way to communicate sea level rise, a romantic way, and how significant it actually is. These woods can only be seen in big storms now, otherwise unseen since the 1950s. And right behind this spot, we have now rock armour to protect the properties behind. And sometimes that story helps with building resilience. I often think I wish he'd known about the ice caps and natural climate change as sea level rises and falls as the ice at the North and South Pole changes. So while we're talking about natural cycles, there have been about 46 glacial cycles after 3 million years. Can I ask you just to put yourself on mute if you haven't already, please? So when people say, I'm not worried, it's all happened before, you can tell them they're right, but this one's different. The most significant thing I ever learned was that it's all happened in the past in as little as a decade. So those are 2 things that can stick in your mind. As you know, I studied climate science for 6 years, but at the closing conference, I asked my peers, what's the best we can do? And they said, get people to cut carbon emissions and get people resilient. So I've devoted my working life to doing that. But I must say, I think there's hope. You might have heard about the storm hitting Coverack, July 2017. It was the most intense storm so far. It was forecasted for Plymouth, but it moved swiftly down the coast, turned, and it was just the tail of the storm that changed the face of Coverack completely. If you broadly understand the risks that you're preparing for, you can do something about it. But we have to make that clearer for everyone through two things. By looking at the green stuff, working with nature, and resilience measures, we can adapt. And by cutting our emissions, changing some big habits to mitigate. And today you can go away with something in your hand, or rather you'll get a link where you can access the artwork to print, to fully start your journey to address the risks. As you navigate this conference, make it easier to frame everything you hear using this. We've got risks, but we can do something about it, can adapt and mitigate. Because you know only too well what the consequences are. Emissions to atmosphere causing flooding. It's important we believe in ourselves, take action, and others will quickly follow suit, but you have to demonstrate your actions. So on to risks, top left corner, we're just going to talk about risks. I want to introduce the Climate Change Committee. It's an independent public body formed under the Climate Change Act to tackle and prepare for climate change, advising government. We're going to have a little look into the current UK risk assessment. On this day, former chair of the Adaptation Committee, Lord John Krebs, presented this slide. Ice mass down, sea level up, temperature up, all the things we know. And already we're seeing both wetter and warmer winters in Devon. Please remember, a lot of people don't like graphs, which is why you're going to get a mixed bag today. Last month, the Climate Change Committee provided a bit of an update because the new risk assessment will come next year. And the current chair, Baroness Julia Brown, made it very clear the risks have increased substantially since this current one. There's a story with this slide. Sitting next to the Thames, hearing about this for the first time, we were interrupted to be told there was a heat wave in London. We were given water every half an hour. I'll never forget the trip from Westminster to Paddington to come home. And my phone was going off at the same time I was chair of Flood Forum. Falmouth flooded twice. Upon hearing all of this, I invited Daniel Johns, the former head of the Adaptation Committee, to come to our Flood Forum conference in Truro. He presented this key slide. Our local authorities acted the next day, changing policy to allow for, see in the red, 500% increase in frequency of heavy rainfall in the most extreme scenario. You've experienced more extreme scenarios, storms with intense rainfall, and you can only change that by adapting to become resilient and mitigating carbon emissions. Just a little tip, Daniel now works for Anglian Water, and he's also working on retrofitting schools regarding heat. He's one to watch. At this conference, the head of Thames Water, an engineer, declared he was worried about people suffering the heat and if there was enough water for them. This graph shows in orange the water need and the blue what they have, not enough. This is Lord Whitty. He had quite a lot to do with the Climate Change Act. He explained they had costed out transporting an iceberg from the Arctic to London to melt and use. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. You could see this line here, 2045. My 11-year-old will be 35. So when she goes to London, where's she going to get her water from? In your case, how will you manage? This isn't a 1976 bout. What are the implications? You really need to contemplate these issues and get them to turn around and say to your community, if you want to get through this, you need to do this and make it simple. Just like recycling, when we started recycling. Now, this is the best slide of the lot, in my opinion, and the last one of the doom. We're going to get onto the good stuff in a minute. In terms of realizing the gravity of what you have to deal with and why, when you hear about the new environmental land management schemes, they're really important because they will help slow the flow, which you'll hear about later, but they'll also absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Here is the River Severn. The blue line is where we have data, Our understanding of recent flooding is restricted to around this period of time, but the record actually goes back in some sites to 1750 BC. They show big flood events, much bigger than any time. You cannot extrapolate recent short data sets for future planning because it doesn't pick up these enormous events, but we have to work with something. So why is this important to you? It's a story for those that don't want to hear about the science or the modelling or the certainty. Just get ready, just stop it getting worse, but you must couple it with something that they can do. To bring this back to us today, this weekend, go and test drive an electric vehicle if you haven't got one already. Buy electricity at home from solar or wind, because the longer you wait and emit emissions to atmosphere, the hotter it becomes, the more water it holds to fall in your flooding event. We refer to those as atmospheric rivers. It's actually a thing. Besides, if you haven't driven an electric vehicle yet, you're missing out. The torque alone is something to get excited about. So there is hope. The 25-year plan is great. With the new Environment and Agricultural Bill, and with Dame Glenys Stacey newly appointed at the helm of the Office for Environmental Protection, it's one to watch. The UK Treasury has published the National Infrastructure Strategy, aimed at providing investors with clarity over government's plans. Significant net zero commitments, and I'm sure a lot of you have been involved in that. If you haven't, please do get involved. And we've got Mark Carney, the ex-Bank of England governor. He's been appointed by Boris Johnson as financial advisor for COP26. He said recently, and this is brilliant, firms that align their business models to the transition to a net zero world will be rewarded handsomely. Those that fail to adapt will cease to exist. The Climate Change Committee last December came out with a sixth carbon budget. It was amazing. Listening to it all, it was like being in a Marvel comic with innovative ideas. Yet we all sighed, asking, will it have teeth? Will there be policy? And about 6 weeks ago, the government announced it's going to be legislated. It's all good news. COP26 in November. I want to introduce, now looking at some of the adaptation, just a little look into the 25-year environment plan. And this was recommended by the Natural Capital Committee. Fantastic piece of work, but it clearly says throughout it, for everyone to play a role. That to me is a hook that we should not ignore, but see as a golden opportunity to encourage all of our community to get involved. By adopting this plan, by adapting, we can reduce risks, by slowing the rivers, and expand the use of natural flood management solutions, crucially absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at the same time. We will adapt by managing our land sustainably. We've got trials that have been great already. And the Environment Bill contains a new biodiversity net gain condition for planning permissions. So even if you don't capture anybody else, people that get fed up about development, Housing Minister Chris Pincher yesterday said that developments will achieve at least a 10% net gain in value for biodiversity. It might be soil health or woodland creation that speaks to your community, or innovative offsetting schemes. So that what emissions you can't cut, can you find a way for nature to absorb the carbon dioxide to offset it? And this includes making properties flood resilience, called Property Flood Resilience, PFR, which you'll hear about later at 4 o'clock with Louisa. She's smashing, it's brilliant. We'll really enjoy that. So if by now you haven't found anything to interest your community, Chapter 3 is great, encouraging children to be close to nature and helping people improve their health and well-being. So many projects are flying out of this now. Please do get involved. So I've tried to define these things and explore it as this. We've got risks, but we can do something about that by adapting and mitigating. And they're all defined in these documents if you'd like to take a further look. So, can you be the trusted messenger and lead the way? Things you need to do are crystallize into these 10 pledges. Easy, simple, personal actions. So you can start right away. Importantly, share a few lines about what you did for each one publicly to encourage others to do the same, and importantly, inspire wider interest by nudging them. They're free to you. They're based on my 6 years of climate and behavioural change science. They're 10 years old. They've been used and adopted by local authorities all over. They show that you're doing something to pave the way for the green industrial revolution. You have the golden ticket of influence through the roles that you already have. And these are all available to you. I'll put the link in afterwards on the website page. Scroll to the bottom. There's 3 types of artwork that you can use. This one is a holiday postcard for visitors. It's got a Cornwall picture. It says, I've been on holiday to Cornwall. There's a picture and a word to change. It's yours free of charge. So just a quick look at some of them. Pledge 1 is to ring your electricity supplier and see if you can switch to green. Bill did this publicly, but what he did, he said, I was able to change to 100% green. It did take me 40 minutes. It's important to write the difficult stuff. If this was easy, we wouldn't be in this mess. But by Bill doing that, other people followed. Well, he's a busy man. If he can give up 40 minutes, so can I. For every time that you switch your electricity at home, you stop 3 tons, around 3 tons of carbon emissions going up there. That's 1 ton next to the bus. I talked about this in a church, and none of these ladies knew except for Dillis. And Dillis said at coffee after church, if you switch with me, I'll give you my code. I'll get £50 and you'll get £50. And I watched Dillis make about £400 in coffee after church. Here is pledge 2. I pledged to buy local seasonal produce as much as possible, starting with 2 meals a week. Now that's a whole meal. And Edwina Hannaford did these publicly and enjoyed supporting the local economy. This looks after the soil. This is nudged by buying seasonably, but also it deals with where is my nearest vitamin C when I'm thinking about food security. I did 17 schools just before COVID. Only 1 child was able to tell me what seasonal food meant. This is important. The Climate Change in East Devon report tells us that the projected proportion of crops to be inundated by sea level rise is shown here. But swift action now can stop further emissions and stop the risk of lock-in that contributes to this. Pledge 3, I pledge to educate myself about climate change. So when you do that, use something local or interesting or a story you've heard today. And if you're not confident, feel free to run it past me. I'm really happy to help you with that. Use something local and interesting. Share your experience. Share a photo, that's really important. But invite them to do it. We sometimes forget to actually ask. With Pledge 4, to contact my MP and friends to do them too. This lady, Deborah Clark, she did 2 a month in the build up to Paris, and you might decide to be doing them now in the build up to COP26 in Glasgow. But afterwards, Sarah Newton listened to Deborah, and then she talked them up in the House of Commons. And even Michael Gove said, yeah, when she mentioned that she wasn't virtual signalling, that she was actually doing them, and see the spike in activity, because you can do them online as well. Huge spike just because a trusted messenger talked about what they'd done. We can galvanise wider local action by demonstrating personal changes from today. Don't forget to share what you're doing publicly. Put your community in a better position to help themselves. You might say, for example, I had a look at the climate change risk assessment. I realised stifling hot summers like 1976 will become the norm. So our communities need to prepare for prolonged dry weather as well as increased flood risk. And I'd like to invite you all to our Green Industrial Revolution Summer Fair. Come and have a free cup of tea and a bit of cake. And while you're there, you can fill out your free flood template. Don't let them out until they've done it. They'll bite your hand off if the cake's good. After all, what would Brunel say if he was here? Give them a prod and a chance to innovate, a prod to give people the opportunity to think through. They're going to help you. By arming them with the 10, they can do them at home and then apply what they've learned to work. So in summary, be confident, trusted messengers. Talk about the risks, balance it with the opportunities, demonstrate your action, invite them to cut emissions, and gently help people connect with the green industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was really inspirational. I hope everybody really enjoyed that. We will move swiftly on to Crystal. So Crystal, I'll hand over to you if you could start sharing your screen.
Have you got me there, Lucy? You have. I'm getting weird views on my screen. Yeah. This is what comes of having government technology.
Yes, you're there, so Crystal. We can hear you.
Okay. Great. So yeah, I can't actually see what you're seeing at the moment, but I will bear with my government technology and apologise, but I will go through from. Can I just double check if that's moving on to the next slide for you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, fantastic. Then I shall do the weird thing then. If I will talk to my screen, I won't be able to see anybody else, but hopefully you're getting me in shot and it doesn't look like a weird Max Headroom talking head thing going on the other side. So thank you. Apologies for the IT glitches at the start. This is kind of not just normal for Cornwall, it's just normal for everywhere now. My name's Crystal Moore. I've worked in the area of climate science for over 30 years now. So I started my career back in the 90s and worked for AstraZeneca, or ICI as it was at the time. And over the time that I have worked in this area, I've seen massive shifts and changes. So I want to share some of that with you. I describe myself as a climate resilience activist, a future farmer, a scientist, a mum, and a qualified optimist. So in this presentation today, my aim is to shake and stir you in the start. Climate change is here, it's real, we're accountable. It's not some distant existential thing for, like in the start of my career, charismatic megafauna to say we used to talk about polar bears and panda bears. This is about us, it really is about us. And I have seen the future. I say that not glibly. I've worked in the forecasting centre, so I worked in the Met Office as head of flood forecasting, and I've seen what is empirically possible but just hasn't manifested at this point in time, or indeed some extremes that we have seen. So I have no doubt about climate change, and I just want to share that with you. But I also want to invite you to rethink and feel optimistic too, because I feel incredibly optimistic. With good reason. There's some amazing people out there working in this field. Lucy talked to us about loads there, didn't she? Loads of people doing amazing things. Where there's a will, there's a way. So on this screen here, you've got, these are the kind of people I want to work with. Think big, have fun, get stuff done. So we should have fun doing this stuff. It's serious, but we should have fun doing it. If you want to link in with me, please do. You'll find me on LinkedIn quite readily. There's me swinging my legs around in the middle with the chair of the Environment Agency in a big chair. It amused me on World Ocean Day. I took a day off from doing my incident command duties, which is what I was doing immediately before this call, by the way, on COVID, to go and spend a day topping up and refreshing, doing the things that I like. On the right-hand side is half of my flood forecasting team at the Met Office. You might just be able to see the insignia in the background there. We only ever get half because we work 24/7, 365, but we have regular picnics and socials, and that's often where the magic happens around innovation and ideas. So why am I a qualified optimist? I started my career back in the 90s, so I was a teenager when this first day cover came out. I found it on the weekend in a charity shop, and I thought it's great because it illustrates a load of stuff to be hopeful about. First of all, I like the slogan, "Save my world, save me." Absolutely. This is all about all of us. It's not about anybody else. I did my PhD in the 1990s on acid rain and aluminium and toxicology. Nobody talks about that anymore, do they? The second stamp there is about holes in the ozone layer. Who talks about that anymore? We've solved that too. And then when you look to the right, we've got the greenhouse effect. Let's call that global heating now. It needs a rebrand. And also the bird of hope, which is how we need to tackle any crisis. So I look at that and feel immensely optimistic. I also look at the background, and that is the temperature insignia for our domain. So that's Devon, actually. You can get one of those if you want to, using some of the links on the Met Office website. But there's lots of reasons to feel optimistic, because where there's a will, there is a way. And the will to act on climate is now. It's happening. So let me step you through some things that I've experienced that make me convinced that it's here, it's now, we're accountable. First one is a graph. Sorry, Lucy, it is a graph, but I'm a scientist. I do like to have a bit of evidence to back up what I'm saying. So back in 2012, I had my first executive position in the Environment Agency, which was head of flood forecasting. I'd just come off the Olympics, working on incidents and emergencies on the Olympics, and my commission was to go and head up flood forecasting. And it was somewhere to go and have a bit of a rest was the idea. It'd been fairly intense working on the Olympics. And 7 days later, we were in major flood. And in November, we had this extreme event. This is in Asaph in Wales. And this event usually wouldn't be a big deal. So in terms of the overall rainfall event, it was something like 120 millimetres in 24 hours, which generally impact terms in Wales would mean several wet sheep, not much more. This place in Asaph had just had new flood defences completed that had a design standard for a 1 in 100 year event, and they overtopped. We forecast that, a proud moment for what we could do to mitigate the effects. So the area was evacuated. There were some people that decided not to evacuate, and unfortunately one of those people did die in this flood. But what was unusual about this event was it shouldn't have had big impacts if the weather system was approaching from the west, which is the prevailing direction. So we get about 10 times as much rainfall in the west of the country as we do in the east. This system was approaching from the east. The catchments aren't orientated to drain as well from the east direction of weather as they are from the west. So what would have been an unremarkable amount of rainfall actually had devastating impacts. And we see that all the time. I talk about whispers in the data whenever I see data that has alarming things in it for me. And that's my applied expertise, because I know how our systems work. I know what is normal for Cornwall, normal for Devon. And that means that alongside the experts that we have in forecasting, and we have amongst the best in the world in flood forecasting in the country, we're able to do something very much more active than just watch the weather come through, watch the flood materialise and help clear up, which is what you all do, which is brilliant. So what's really important is when you have events like this that you learn from them. So just how unusual has recent times been? I think this illustrates just how unusual. So summer 2012, my induction with flood forecasting. I think it's the wettest drought on record. This was 140 days of heightened flood risk. So the wettest late spring and summer in 250 years. I'll let you read the other stats there. So compelling evidence of rapidly changing climate. And what we are experiencing here is massive pivots from drought to flood conditions. And I think, we saw that this year as well. I think the systems are quite primed now. This counting calendar shows you a flood risk over that period. This came as a Secret Santa present for my ops manager in the centre. He was given a t-shirt with this printed on, and he could carry on December. We didn't need any green for December. This is the highest level of flood risk that we experienced over that period. And you can see it's intense, but that isn't very unusual. But what is different now is the type of response that we get. So when I first started in flood forecasting, it was very much detection led, a couple of hours notice, you'd make sure the trash screens were clear, and then you'd help communities clear up afterwards. Now it's an incredibly active response, and that's because we have brilliant forecasting that allow the lead time to do things. So here you can see Cumbria in 2015. The Environment Agency has 40 kilometres of temporary barrier that it can deploy anywhere in the country within 12 hours. What looks like one of those head massage things in the middle there, that is actually our mutual aid arrangements. So deploying staff from all around the country into Cumbria to help with the response. I often describe it that in a real incident, we have two front lines. So we have the community and helping the community, but we also have the political front line. And here you can see Rory Stewart, who was our floods minister at the time, who also had a constituency in Cumbria, which often focuses effort. Yeah, and we had to manage him. This is our chief executive and our flood executive, who were dealing with the Cobra side of things. That's kind of the stuff that I was doing as well. And here you've got the media side, but also massive amounts of sandbagging and an incident command vehicle that goes into the area. So a very different kind of response because our forecasting is really good. What's also really important is we learn from the event. So I'm not going to go through all of this detail, but we have amazing scientists that do amazing things and decode what has happened. So any of you that see the flood guidance statement or any of the kind of stuff that any of my services put out, we're constantly looking to improve. And every event has loads to teach us, absolutely loads. So really important that we do the science, but also we do the communication, because it's in the actions that we get the different outcomes, and that's incredibly important. So here I've got a little quiz for you to do, which is I call it Spot the Sinister Cell. So this is a summer day, and if I can get the animation to go, you'll see a radar rainfall animation here. And what I want you to do is to try and get your eye in, play forecaster for me, and work out which one is the really sinister cell. So sinister cells, we often call this kind of popcorn convection. We know what the setup is like. We know that we could have a really bad thunderstorm. We know that the key message is most places will be dry. But if you do get a particularly bad cell, then it can be catastrophic. So the lighter colours are the more intense rainfall. I'm going to play it one more time, and I want you to have in your head, is it A, B or C that got walloped on this occasion? A, B or C. Got it? That was a tricky forecasting day for sure. It was actually number A, or letter A, that got walloped on that day. So that's Coverack. Lucy talked about it earlier. Massive flood flash event, an extreme, and it devastates people, totally devastates people. You can feel that man's sorrow as he's looking at his possessions there. Doesn't matter whether a flood event is a rapid onset one or a long, slow event. It has a huge emotional impact. It has an impact on the economy for sure, but it's the emotional impact that gets me every time when you see people that have to recover and be resilient through something like that. So Coverack, was that an extreme event? Was it an unusual event? Yes, it was an extreme event. It was a UK rainfall record. So 3 hour total was a UK rainfall record. We don't have any accurate gauges in that area. It's actually the smallest catchment in the country, so less than 2 square kilometres. There was a builder's bucket that did catch some, and we reckon it was over 200 millimetres of rainfall in 3 hours. So that is an enormous amount of rainfall. However, it's not that unusual, and if you just look at how rare or extreme flash floods in our geography here, you'll see it's not that rare. And actually here you see the range of where Coverack fell. It's towards the more extreme, but it's not the most extreme that we've experienced. and the climate is still heating. Let's call it climate heating. So moving on to what does that also mean for too little water? It's not just about too much water. I spent 18 months working for Ofwat as their director for stakeholder and programme on something called RAPID. So here, the Ofwat decided to put in place a programme with £469 million worth of money just to look at the feasibility of building new water infrastructure. So that's not building it. If we were building it, it would be closer to 9 billion. I had that budget to look at the feasibility, and the challenge was massive. The challenge was to create that infrastructure, so 9 million people's worth of infrastructure by 2035. That's when it's needed by. So it's not just about too much water, it's also about too little water, or not enough water in the right place. And anybody who's worked in infrastructure will know that building that kind of infrastructure on that kind of scale in 15 years is incredibly fast. So we need to move incredibly fast to be able to avert some of the more severe impacts, some of the resilience challenges that we have. But we can act fast, and we do. And I genuinely think that this period that we're in now is a massive pivot point. We see pivot points happening throughout history, and it's one of the reasons why I feel optimistic. Obviously, Boris isn't feeling too optimistic there, but events like we're experiencing now really do shift consciousness and redefine what's important to us. If you look at the last time we had a shared trauma on the scale that we're having now, think Second World War, some really significant decisions were made that might have been counterintuitive to a country that had very little money. There were very little money at the end of a war, but we chose to create the NHS, and we chose to create our security system as well, so our social security system. So I think this can be a pivot point for something really positive. And I just want to share with you a few examples. When I created this slide, I think it was something like, it probably would have been maybe similar time last year. So you see in terms of scoping things and scale, so our emissions were down, but they weren't down by what we will need to do to achieve 1.5 degrees, which I genuinely think we're going to overshoot that anyway. So we'd need to have a really significant pivot point, and adopting all of the kind of things that Jenny was talking about Lucy was talking about, sorry, about practical examples of things that we can do, but we can do it, and it can be a midwife of something really positive. So I was provocative, as at the time I was in a economic regulator, and economic regulators obviously talk about sweet spots and generally will not invest early, and I talked a lot about the paradox of thrift. Now is not the time not to invest in these things. A lot of the reports that we've seen with very good evidence behind them say that investing now will be the best thing in terms of economic outcomes. Carbon is really cheap now. It won't be really cheap in very much time. So it's about £12 a tonne at the moment. I fully expect it to get to be over £50 a tonne very, very quickly, actually. There's also, what's the downside of doing all of these great positive things? So really good for lots of things around our sustainability revolution, but also really good geopolitically. That there are climate refugees now, there will be more. So really good for stabilising humanity, actually. So here's some local examples and a few that are a bit further afield when it comes to rethinking. So I'm a director of South Dartmoor Community Energy. They do amazing things. They do amazing things with the community at heart, and they also do amazing things that are based on renewables. So there's a project just outside of Plymouth that you'll know about, and there's also some other projects that we're involved with that are around social housing, but to high levels of environmental sustainability, energy design. All of these projects are happening with no government funding whatsoever, and they are all self-sustaining Government isn't going to have money to invest in lots of things that we might think are important to be invested in. So it really is the time for businesses and community groups and people like you who are moved to make us more resilient, to move, to do it. It's a time to step up or step aside. Really, really do get involved with combining head and heart and getting stuff happening. The next example, rethink example I'm going to share with you is the one that I led within Ofwat, so the Office of the Water Regulator, the economic regulator for water. The whole programme, the nearly £500 million programme that I was involved with leading, we designed it differently to what we'd done before. So instead of retrofitting what could we get for the environment out of this, we designed public value in from the outset. And this is the output. I like creative stuff, you'll see from my presentation. This is the output of one of the workshops that I ran for the economists that were in Ofwat. And you can see there's a massive range of positive spin-offs. So Canals and Rivers Trust, total wellbeing value, 3.8 billion per annum. If I think locally here, so I grew up in the Tamar catchment, and one of my school projects was to look at Roadford Reservoir and, you know, all of the stuff that would be put underwater there, all of the politics about providing Plymouth's water, etc. And it was our stuff being drowned. I wonder how the community would have received that if they could see the vision of what Roadford has become now as a community hub, as a health and wellbeing hub, as a leisure facility, as a place to visit. You know, it's very different. And that's what the water companies need to be prompted to do. I must say the water companies, it felt like a big shift for most of them. Some of them were more forward thinking than others. Anglian Water is a good example. They show good leadership in this area. We need to encourage South West Water to do more. Next, qualified optimist and rethink example for me is this. This is something that I'm calling a forest of humanity. This example here is something that I'm working on. So I currently work for Sir Patrick Vallance on COVID, which is what I was doing some stuff on just before I came straight in here. And I'm working on his COP26 contribution. He's got a role, obviously. He's got a lot to do. But one thing that he is sponsoring, and anybody who's got any land that could make this dream a reality, please do contact me, around creating this forest of humanity. So this is a forest on a 2.2 or 2 times 2 kilometre scale that has, this image is created by Sand in Your Eye, an amazing creative company. This is Ansha. She is an Ethiopian climate refugee. And the vision is to create this forest. Every child would have a sapling that would be geocached. They could follow it. This dashboard will show, there will be a digital dashboard attached to the geocache, which will show the agency of the choices that they make. So what will their own personal choices make around how they will affect climate and the reality of climate. And if individually you'll think your efforts are small, actually, as a group, as a collective, as every school child in the country, you can make a massive difference, and you will also be able to see that on the dashboard. Patrick loves the education element of it, but also the element about getting us as scientists to become better communicators and better at engaging people where they need to be engaged. So as a concept, I describe it creating a new lung for the country. It builds forward better, but it also used the arts and culture to invoke a dream of becoming a better ancestor. And I think that's what Greta's generation is asking of us, isn't it? It's asking us to act differently, to not scupper their future. And I like the idea as it's a promotion of a whole economy and a whole society recovery. So my invitation to you is to be part of my tribe. I love collecting together people and ideas and making those things a reality. And I think our mission is to inspire a nation to see it, to sense it, and to feel it, just like you can in all of these images. Make carbon visible, make the change that you want visible, shake and stir, and feel optimistic about the future. And my last slide is my last visit to Italy. So stay inspired. This is a group of scientists. We're all flood scientists here. Probably not enough women there. I think there was only 5 of us. But in the Joint Research Centre in the European Commission's Research Centre in Ispra in Italy. So I hope that I've shaken and stirred you, but also to leave you inspired so that when that first aid cover comes out, perhaps on my retirement day, global heating isn't part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Another really inspiring presentation to follow Lucy's there. We haven't had any specific questions come through in the chat box, so I can't see everybody because we've got people over a couple of screens here. So if you would like to ask a question, if you could just click the raise your hand button, in, which should be by the chat box. We do have a few minutes to ask some questions. Okay, I haven't had anybody's question come up. So Lucy has just shared her web link there for you to have a look. Please do have a look at that. And yes, my colleague Harry has a session that will follow on from this. And we are at Devon Communities Together building a climate emergency network. Actually, Harry, would you like to just have a moment to just explain?
Thank you, speakers. That was excellent, really inspiring. Just to say, on the 19th of July from 2 till 4, we've got the second meeting of the Devon Local Councillors Network. The first event went really well. We had 70 people attend. It is to be presenting the different parish, different local councils, and people are just starting. People are at different scales of action, and it's the idea is we can all learn from each other. We can learn from projects that have already started. We can learn what toolkits, what case studies are working best. And so there'll be an element of that kind of just peer learning, joining each other up and learning from other councillors and other community groups around the county. And the second element, we're going to have 2 excellent speakers. One speaker will be talking about engaging with farmers and landowners around elms and the use of land for public goods, which is a win-win scenario for both the public and the councillors and the farmers and landowners. And the other side is how to develop a engaging vision and using visioning as a way to engage your community. So that link is there in the chat box. It's on the.
Thank you, Harry. That would be brilliant if so many of you could sign up to come along to that. I think it would really follow nicely. We do just have a question there. How is the council in Devon engaging with the commercial sector? I don't know if we actually have anybody here from Devon County Council to actually answer that question. I think for all of you who are councillors, local councillors, I think you could certainly ask this kind of questions of your county councillor. I'll just double check the chat box because I think a few people have just put some questions in there.
Would you like me to show where the resources are?
Yeah, if you could please, Lucy, that would be really helpful. I think that's
okay.
The main thing people would like to
okay. I'll just show you, hopefully you can see that. So the website link you can see, make a difference, make a pledge or 2, and you can do the 10 pledges online if you wanted to, and that shows you how you can do them, and we can see if there's a spike. I'm not offering actually data analysis for individuals, but as a whole. So if you did a program and then we saw a spike in that activity, I can certainly tell you about that. So that's doing them online. You don't have to commit to that. You don't have to sign in and log in. It's really free. There's free artwork to print as well. So if you wanted to print it off, you can download on this link. It's got the 10 pledges there. But also because I did the work in the schools, and what was fun with that is you could go into schools and talk about climate, and then you can talk about all the things that lead to this for the right ages. And then you could give them this, but quite often you'd say, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we? And the children might say, oh, perhaps our parents are lazy. And of course you wouldn't say that, but if the children want to go home and prompt their parents to do this, that's a really good way of doing it. I used to work for Greenpeace in New Zealand about 20 years ago, and quite often the people over there would say, unless my child tells me, I'm not going to do it. And I think that works quite well here because they've just got the data back and they've actually done quite a bit. This is new. This is somebody asked me, did a visitor postcard. So here, you know, when you go in somewhere and you see a free postcard and you gather them all up. So there's a bit of room here to write to your friends at home. I saw these pledges while in Cornwall and thought I'd have a go and invite you to do them too. So we're getting a double whammy. So there's room for them to write here and a little bit here, but they've got a pretty image and they've also got images to sort of help people, encourage them. And it would be really simple for our designer to just switch the photo and put in Devon there. So just to show you those, they're all there on the Climate Vision website. They're all free of charge. Help yourself, you can download.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And I think so the basic URL is just climatevision.co.uk, and then I think you can access all of the different resources from that. But we've only got a few minutes left. I do just want to draw everybody's attention to the sessions later on in the day. If you haven't already signed up, they follow on in many ways from this keynote and from our first session around updating community emergency plans. So the next session will be a case study session from a community who we gave some funding to, and I will also be talking through how you can actually apply to our fund to support your community emergency planning. Then we've got a session from the Environment Agency who'll be talking about catchment level flood mitigation. Then it is Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue. We're talking about how we can plan and mitigate and communicate to prevent fire risk. And finally, we have the Pathfinder project talking about property level flood resilience. So how people can access flood barriers and all sorts of things for their home or business property to protect against flooding. So if you haven't signed up to any of those sessions and you're free for the rest of the day, please do. It's the same links that you will have received to go to the Devon Communities Together webpage, and from there you can click through on the Devon Community Resilience Forum event tab to all of the different sessions of the day. So I hope to see many of you at later sessions in the day. So just to conclude by really thanking Crystal and Lucy, that was a really inspiring keynote. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to talk to us all. And thank you to everybody else as well for coming along. Hope to see you later. Thank you.